There you are. We just arrived at Gliese 667. Better get ready. Set the drone to survey mode and prep for atmospheric analysis.
Yeah.
This could be it, you know? The moment we finally make contact.
I know.
It would undoubtedly be humanity's greatest discovery, finding evidence of intelligent life beyond our world. Imagine civilizations out there, perhaps millions of years ahead of us, with technology we can barely conceive, waiting silently in the depths of space.
The first thing to say is it would be remarkable if we found microbial life, because we would like to know if life began in more than one place in the solar system, given the right conditions. And I've spoken to a few colleagues who work on the Europa Clipper mission at JPL, who said that if we don't find life on Europa, if our picture of Europa is correct, and there's this long-lived ocean and active geology and so on, and we still don't find life, we might start to think that even the origin of life might be rare. But you're right to say that when we talk about aliens, if we use that word, then people are really asking, is there anything out there that we can talk to, right? Is there things like this out there? That's a whole other question, perhaps. Let's say that we find that life began on Mars and Europa. So let's say we find microbes. Then, as you say, the question becomes, how likely is it that given the origin of life, at some point you get intelligence, complex living things, and then intelligence at the civilization level? And again, of course, we don't know. But we do have the only piece of evidence we have that would allow us to make a guess is the time that it took to go from the origin of life to a civilization on Earth. And that time is something like 3.8 billion years. So let's say around 4 billion years. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. So we have two pieces of evidence, really. One is that life began pretty much as soon as it could on Earth, give or take, right, when the Earth had formed and cooled down. But then it took something like 4 billion years to produce a civilization. And that is a long time. That is about a third of the age of the universe. And so if that is typical, and again, to emphasize, we don't know, it's the only piece of evidence we have, but if it really does take many billions of years to go from the origin of life to things like us, then you could argue that the number of civilizations might be quite low in a galaxy like the Milky Way. And that's just based on the observation that we live in a violent universe. Many stars don't live for 4 billion years, for a start, right? So you need a particular kind of star. You could argue that the longest lived stars, which are red dwarf stars, which are the most numerous in the galaxy, are not conducive to the evolution of complex life, because the planets have to be very close to the star in order to be warm enough to be in what's called the habitable zone around the star. If it's a dim star like a red dwarfs are very active stars. You get planets that are what's called tidally locked, which means that one face always faces towards the star, in the same way that our moon always presents one face to the Earth. It's the same effect. So that doesn't seem to be a setup that you could imagine would produce an ecosystem as complex as ours. You can make kind of educated guesses. So that's why I think it's fair to say that many biologists I speak to, not all, but many, would say that given the amount of time and the things that had to happen to produce complex multicellular life on Earth and then intelligence, given all that, then it might be unusual to produce complex living things like us. But I emphasize this, we're talking about science here. So in the absence of any evidence, then we can look at what we can see and try to make some educated guesses. But that's not to say that, absolutely not to say that we shouldn't look. And so programs like SETI, for example, looking for radio signals, but signatures of civilizations. As I mentioned, the James Webb Space Telescope is now capable of looking at the chemical composition of atmospheres. You could imagine seeing oxygen at high concentration in an atmosphere, which then suggests photosynthesis is present on the planet. So it's possible we could detect life on a planet around a distant star before we detect signs of it on Mars, even if it exists on Mars. Or it could be, I suppose, you could imagine megastructures around stars, you know, these ideas of Dyson spheres and incredibly advanced civilizations building such large objects in space that you could see a signal of them. And we do, it's a legitimate part of astronomy to look for those signals. But so I should mention that we haven't seen any as yet.
Found another artifact. Echo, scan the terrain and pinpoint its origins.
When we imagine intelligent alien life, we usually think of living beings. Organisms somewhat similar to us, shaped by evolution and biology. But what if advanced civilizations have moved beyond their biological origins entirely? After thousands or even millions of years of technological advancement, perhaps they've chosen to exist in a digital form, uploading their consciousness to machines, existing permanently as a machine-based intelligence. Such beings wouldn't age or tire, and could easily endure interstellar journeys impossible for biological life. Could it be that the intelligent alien civilizations we're searching for are no longer biological at all, but instead purely digital?
That's a good question. It goes back to the Fermi paradox. I think it looks like, to me, that it's inevitable that a civilization like ours, which is biological, ultimately will become, you know, silicon-based or whatever it is. We're going to do that at some point, perhaps in the near future. I don't see any reason why that's not possible, and I think we're going to do it. And then you open up this possibility of sending life, albeit the von Neumann machines, right, the replicators, out to the stars. Think about Mars, for example. Why aren't we on Mars now? It's not because we don't have the capability. We have stuff on Mars, but they're robots. Because it's easier to send robots to Mars than people. People are really not very good at spaceflight.
Well, that was a rough ride.
You can say that again.
Biologically, it's difficult to go to our nearest neighbouring planet is challenging because the life support systems are difficult. Our biology is not built for that. It didn't evolve for that. So it's hard, much easier if you can send machines. So I think the future of our civilization ultimately will be machine-based. Again, that then feeds into the question of why nobody's done it. Because you become immortal, basically, as a civilization, if you can do that. If you can send your machines out to the stars, then that's it. Your civilization will live forever, effectively, for all intents and purposes.
We live in a universe so immense, with countless galaxies each holding billions of stars. It's almost impossible to think we're truly alone. Yet within our own Milky Way, we've heard nothing but silence. Could it be that intelligent civilizations exist out there, yet none are close enough for us to ever know?
I find it inconceivable there aren't other civilizations out there somewhere. The question is how far, really? Do they overlap in time, and how far do you have to go to find one? And if it's true that we're the only civilization in the Milky Way, in a sense, I think that's all that matters to us. Because I don't see any chance of civilizations crossing between galaxies. I just don't see it. You could do it. The laws of physics don't stop you from doing it. So, and that's just the way, one example would be the way that relativity is, even without wormholes or anything like that. Just special relativity, Einstein's theory of special relativity tells you as you go close to the speed of light, let's say you launch from the Earth and accelerate such that at some point you're traveling, let's say 99.999999% of the speed of light, because I know this number. So if you're going at that speed, then the distances between the galaxies, let's say the Andromeda galaxy, that shrinks by a factor of 7,000. It's called the gamma factor in relativity. So the distance to the Andromeda galaxy is no longer, from the point of view of the spacecraft, is no longer 2.5 million light years. It's 2.5 million light years divided by 7,000, which is still not enough, right, to get you there in any reasonable time. But you can, as you approach close to the speed of light, that factor can become arbitrarily large. According to just physics, if you could do that, you can travel between the galaxies. But you've got to travel extremely close to the speed of light in a human lifetime. The limit, by the way, in relativity, which you can't, but if you were to travel at the speed of light, then the distance shrinks to zero. The closer you get to speed of light, from the point of view of someone in the spacecraft traveling between the galaxies, the more the distance shrinks. The flip side is that time passes more slowly on the spacecraft relative to the person on the Earth, and so you can, all those things, but that's just standard first year undergraduate relativity. So I wouldn't claim the laws of nature, as we understand them, stop you traveling between galaxies. But the challenge of traveling very, very, very close to the speed of light, I think it looks impossible from our perspective.
Every star you see in the night sky is likely orbited by planets, many potentially capable of hosting life. In fact, scientists estimate that there could be billions of Earth-like worlds in our galaxy alone. Yet despite these vast numbers, we've found no evidence of other intelligent beings. Could alien life truly be so extraordinarily rare?
It's a great question. The answer is we don't know how rare it is, and we are trying to detect it. So in our solar system, primarily, although it is possible, I should say, that with the James Webb Space Telescope and other instruments that are coming online now, that it's possible we could detect biosignatures in the atmospheres of planets around distant stars. But that's at the edge of our capability at the moment. So at the moment we're talking about, of course, the missions to Mars. Not yet quite designed to detect life, but to check if the conditions were present on Mars that may support life. I think it's fair to say we're pretty sure that the conditions on Mars 4 billion years ago, let's say, were very similar to the conditions that led to the origin of life on Earth. And so we've got the Perseverance rover now, which is taking samples as part of the Mars Sample Return mission, which hopefully, although the timeline is by no means clear, but hopefully those samples will return to Earth at some point, let's say in the next decade or so, with luck. That's because we suspect that there may be evidence that life existed or may still exist on Mars, because we're pretty sure that there were oceans, or at least lakes and rivers on Mars for a reasonable amount of time, around 4 billion years ago. And we know that there's a high water content in the soil. I think we suspect there may be pockets of water below the surface, so it's possible life may still exist on Mars. So that's an open question. As we speak, there are 2 missions in flight to Jupiter, to the Jovian system, in particular focused on Europa, which is Jupiter's moon, which is famously, I think, one of the prime candidates for life beyond Earth, because it has an ocean, a saltwater ocean, it has active geology, and it seems as if that ocean has been there for a very long time. So the 2 missions that are on the way are Europa Clipper, which is the NASA mission, and JUICE, which is a European mission, which are both really focused at not looking for life specifically, they're not equipped to do that, but to see if the conditions are right, in preparation hopefully for a future mission.
Scientists searching for alien life have begun focusing on worlds closer to home, planets and moons within our own solar system. Beneath the icy surface of Europa, or deep below Mars's dry, rocky terrain, there might be ancient traces of life. Could we finally find evidence of life beyond Earth within our lifetime? And if so, which nearby world is the most likely candidate?
I think Mars is the one we understand the best, other than Earth. And we have very strong evidence that the conditions were right for life, let's say around 4 billion years ago, so when life was beginning on Earth. So Mars is, I think, the prime candidate because it's easy to get to as well. So just, scientifically, we've got a lot of space probes in orbit and on the surface. But also, I think it's true that some of the moons of Jupiter, Europa, is a very strong candidate. So all these so-called water worlds, and there are quite a few of the moons in the solar system where we think there are subsurface oceans. The guess, I suppose, at the moment, the assumption, let's say, is that given water and given active geology and given the right chemistry, called redox chemistry, so reducing ocean, let's say, and oxidants that can come into it, which means that electrons can travel around. Given those conditions, which do seem to be present in a lot of places, then why not, given that amino acids are very common, so the building blocks of life are certainly around everywhere. I think it was Haldane, I can't remember who it was, a famous biologist, who just said that life is an electron looking for a place to land. It's just chemistry, right? Ultimately. That's the thing about life. Whatever it is, it's very complicated chemistry, but it's chemistry. And chemistry, given the right conditions, chemistry happens. I can't think I've met many biologists who think there's something strange and unlikely about the origin of life given the right conditions. I might be wrong there, but the key thing to say though is we don't know. So we don't know what sort of a thing that is, the origin of replicators essentially. So you're talking about carbon, probably long chain carbon molecules that can encode a pattern, and that the pattern can be copied basically. So just physically, that's what DNA is, right? Or RNA, it's a code, it's a pattern, it's a chemical pattern that's able to copy itself. And you know, we don't know how that started.
What the hell is that? Let's go check it out.
In recent years, there's been a surge of interest in unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs, with official reports and testimonies suggesting intelligent aliens might have already visited Earth. Yet, without clear, undeniable evidence, something we can see, touch, or scientifically verify, these claims remain intriguing possibilities rather than confirmed facts. As the saying goes, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
I know a bit about government in the UK, and from what I know about government in the UK, the idea that they have been competent enough for long enough to manage such a secret and then begin to have this idea that they will release these things. Given what I know about my governments of the past in my lifetime, I just don't I don't think the level of competence is there, right? I mean, there is actually, and I'm kind of joking, but there's some research, you can find research papers, which is research on populations of people and how long a group of people can keep a secret. And not surprisingly, the more people that know about it, the less amount of time. It's almost like a law of nature, that the more people that know, the less amount of time you can keep the secret.
Finally, we have undeniable evidence of alien life. Now we just need to keep it a secret.
I just think that we see, you know, a plan, a plot, some really very, you know, I don't know, competent organisation that's there managing all these things. And I just see no evidence of that. I see no evidence of that level of competence in government or elsewhere. I just don't see it. So that's my view.
When we think about aliens, we often imagine creatures that look a lot like us. Big heads, 2 eyes, walking upright, essentially variations of ourselves. But life evolving under entirely different conditions might look completely unlike anything we've imagined. Alien beings could be so strange, so radically different from us, that we might not even recognize them as alive if we encountered them.
I said that. I said it's suspicious to me that every time you see, you know, depictions of aliens, they just look like humans in a kind of suit. You know, like with some little makeup on and things like that. And obviously, if you go back to Star Trek in the 1960s, that's because it was really expensive to do anything that wasn't someone dressed up in a rubber suit. And it is true that the aliens of popular culture that we see, you know, the UFO kind of people, they're all just like E.T. Right? They all look like E.T., right? Steven Spielberg's E.T. And so I did say I don't understand that. I don't see why it would be the case. Someone who's a biologist did, I think, reply somewhere on the web and say you can make some arguments that maybe this is a fairly common solution to the problem of being able to have depth perception. So a couple of eyes. You need to triangulate. So, and that's useful if you're predators or prey. And how do you run around on the surface of a planet like this? Maybe 4 legs or 2 legs is the. I mean, there are things with more legs, right, on the planet, but this symmetry, this bilateral symmetry that we have, maybe that's quite common. Maybe it's the way that you evolve with a mouth at one end and whatever, and you can eat food. And that, I guess I don't know enough. Maybe you can make some arguments. My guess is, unless someone could make a very strong argument to me otherwise, that I don't see why things should all look like us. I just don't see that.
Perhaps the most fascinating thing about the search for alien life is what it reveals about us, that we're driven by an innate curiosity, always reaching out into the universe, hoping we're not alone. And maybe the answer isn't even as important as the question itself. The relentless human pursuit to explore, discover, and understand our place among the stars.
If we find that life began a separate origin to Earth on Mars or Europa or anywhere else, then I think you just assume then that life is common throughout the universe. If you have 2 separate genesis moments in a single solar system, then I think you can just assume, you can extrapolate then. So then the question becomes, given some kind of simple life, single cells, replicators, given that, how likely is it that you suddenly get something like us that has a conversation? Which is kind of a big jump. I mean, you think about what we are. I think it was Sagan who said that a physicist is a hydrogen atom's way of learning about hydrogen atoms. You start with the universe 13.8 billion years ago with quite a lot of hydrogen, some helium, and a little bit of lithium and some other stuff, but not much, right? Basically hydrogen and helium. And then 13.8 billion years later, you've got these things that have worked out that 13.8 billion years ago, the universe was made in the hydrogen and helium. It's quite a big ask, it seems. So it may be a whole other question. Is it inevitable that given the origin of life and some time, let's say, 2 billion years, 3 billion years, 4 billion years, if you can have a planet that supports an unbroken chain of life for 4 billion years, is there a really high probability that you'll get intelligence, or is there a low probability you'll get intelligence? We don't actually even know the answer to that. Professor Brian Cox, Horizons, a 21st Century Space Odyssey, live on stage.